Anyone think about any questions? Some scope questions during the break? Yeah.
So when you have nested scopes, is that the same thing as, I looked it up a little bit, is that the same thing as lexical scopes when you have nested scopes?
So lexical scope basically means that if you look at it, the scope is defined by how it looks. Like, so if the nested scope is inside of it, that's, yeah, so I guess you could think of it that way. Like nested scope is an example of lexical scope. Yeah. So if you have the function, a sibling, and even though you're calling it from inside, that scope doesn't work because of something called lexical scope. And the way I think about it is that if you see the function actually inside, then it has access. It's not like an academic definition, but that's just like my working understanding of how that is. Cool. And Joe, you said you had a question? You answered it. Awesome. Cool. Anyone else have any questions? All right. So we're going to talk about closure. So closure is the next step with scope. A closure happens when you return a function from inside of the function, and that inner function retains access to the scope. We saw that a little bit in our exercises here at the very bottom. So even though we made this inner function global, it still had access, and it remembered, quote unquote, that we had incremented our counter inner scope to 12. And so, why? We're going to get there. We're going to get there. We'll walk through it. And so that is an example of closure.
Isn't that a violation of scope?
It's a violation of scope. Now, I think it's taking advantage of the power of scope to do some interesting things.
But didn't we say that if the variable inside the function is not available to something that's outside the function?
But if you return the function from inside the function, that function was originally inside the function. But we'll get there. We'll walk through it. We'll walk through it step by step and talk about what I mean when I say closure. So our first thing I want us to look at is this function called closure alert. And it says, it's a function that has a variable that's initialized. It says, help, I'm a variable stuck in a closure. And then we have this inner function called alerter. And all it does is alert x. And then we call alerter from inside. So let's play with this in our console. Can everyone see that? Even in the back? Cool. Thanks. So now, we have closure alert. So if I just type out closure alert, what is that? What's going to do? What is going to happen? How about Ben? What's going to happen if I just type out closure alert like that?
It's just going to return the definition of the function.
Absolutely. So it's just going to return the definition of the function. Then if we want to call the function, you put the 2 parentheses, right? So we call it. Once we call it, it's going to go into this function body, right? It's going to declare this variable. It's going to say, great, there's a function. Then it's going to call alerter. And at that point, it goes inside alerter's function body and alerts x. And then we have this alert. Can someone read that?
Help, I'm a variable stuck in a closure.
Thank you. Awesome. So that seems comfortable. We've done that before, right, in previous exercises. We're just calling a function from inside of a function. And it's not a surprise to us that this x refers to the x in the parent function, because we know that their child function retains access to that parent. Cool. Any questions on that? Thumbs? Cool. Did you have a question with the side thumb?
Not like that.
Okay.
I didn't I didn't see where you called the closure alert, so that never gets called at all. Then?
Well, I just called it in the console, but for example, we could just do like this. Yeah. So here's an add-on to that example. The difference here is that we have a set timeout. What does set timeout do?
How long that alert will run?
What will it do?
How long that alert will go?
Yeah, so it will wait
Milliseconds.
1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second, and then it will call this function. So it doesn't call it right away. It creates a delay. And so if we call this function here, closure alert, let's walk through it. So from the top, let's see. Remind me of your name again. Is it John?
John? Yeah.
Okay. So let's walk through how this code would run in the browser.
All right.
Just line. Everyone gets one line.
Just one line.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to see the closure alert, define the function, and
Mm-hmm. And then Rich.
there's the content.
Mm-hmm.
Then it jumps past all that, right, to set timeout? Oh, to that one?
So this is the entire function
Oh, there's
body.
the entire file. I'm sorry. Okay, so it goes after that and it calls closure alert and invokes that.
Mm-hmm. And then Grace.
So we're in the body of the function, and it assigns the string to X.
Yep. And then Joe.
There's another function there, but it gets skipped, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we skip it. Skip this function.
Then you set timeout, wait 1,000 milliseconds. And then
Does it wait
call.
now?
Yeah.
Does it pause?
It pauses 1 second.
This is actually asynchronous, so it's not going to pause. It's not going to pause it. But that's a common misconception.
It's like a scheduler.
Yeah, so it says, okay, call alerter in 1 second.
But I'm going to do whatever else.
But I'm going to
do.
keep running. It's going to keep going. And then Kim?
Console.
Mm-hmm. And then William?
I'm sorry, I was looking at the comments. Where are we at?
Right here. We're at this console.log.
All the fun stuff's over.
I know. So then where does it go?
Then we'll jump out of running that function and go back to where it was called the closure alert. And,
Mm-hmm. And then in 1 second, what happens?
That alerter is called finally.
Yep, alerter is called. So then what do we do? Kevin?
Alert X.
Mm-hmm. I'll get to the question in just a second. And then, so alert X. What's X been?
Just the string.
Mm-hmm.
It's defined earlier.
Yep.
In closure.
What does it say? You can read it in a
Oh.
funny voice if you want.
Help, I'm a variable stuck.
That's your funny voice.
A closure.
All right. That works.
Just a note here, everyone can please raise their voices a little bit so they can hear things.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Cool. So we alert it, and then where does it go? Jake. We just need a complete.
It's all complete, so good on that.
Yeah, and then it just goes down here.
1 second.
Yeah. Awesome. Tanner?
So, do you ever have to worry about setting, so in that case you set it at a second. Do you ever have to worry about the code catching up to the timer that you set so that stuff might get out of order? Like in this example, let's say you did this on a 386 or something.
On a
Maybe
what?
On a really old computer.
Uh-huh.
Would it ever get to the point where it accidentally didn't get that far. Do you see what I'm saying?
Like, like it would be too slow.
Right.
I don't know. I've never done anything where like the millisecond is really important, like something down to the millisecond. But I can't imagine that it's so accurate because of the way like the queue and the stack and the event loop work. It just seems like, so the event loop doesn't run all the time. So the way I imagine that it wouldn't be 100% accurate. So.
If you had a loop here that was looping over code that was executing without ever returning back to the event processing loop,
Mm-hmm.
if that took 5 seconds to run, set timeout would then get run as soon as that event loop gets rescheduled.
Yeah, okay.
Rather than waiting a second after it finished running that 5-second process.
Yeah, exactly. And then you had a question?
The question was, what is the set timeout? Is that a function?
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Set timeout is just a native function that comes, I believe, with the browser. And we know it's a function because we see these 2 parentheses next to it, and that's calling a function. We call it. What are some other times that we see 2 parentheses near each other? So we talked a little bit about where we saw like 2 squiggly brackets near each other. When else do we see this syntax?
Expression statement.
Specifically, yeah, like an if. So we have an if statement. We'll use it. So if, parentheses, and then we have the curly brackets.
I had a different question.
Okay.
Loops.
Loops. So we use them for loops as well. Where else? We use them in functions right after the function keyword here, or the function name. And that's all I can think of.
You can use it in a mathematical expression to
Oh, yeah.
assert precedence.
Yeah, totally. So we can use it to change the order of our math, the way it's, I guess assert precedence is a good way of saying it. Yeah, so those are the only times I can think of at the top of my head. So we have if statements, we have loops, there's also a switch, and then in the functions. Those are off the top of my head, the only times when we see that. And so just keep that in mind. If it doesn't look like a loop, we know what loops look like. If it doesn't look like an if statement and all these things, then you're probably calling a function.
What about when you want to create an anonymous function?
Mm-hmm.
Is that just like a hack, or is that valid JavaScript?
That's valid JavaScript. You can use an anonymous function. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think I'm lost.
Sure.
If I were the interpreter,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing I would do is skip all the way to the bottom line and
Yes.
run closure alert.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would go up to the top and run the function. I would set X,
Mm-hmm.
skip the next function, and I would hit the timeout. I would wait a second. Then I would run the alerter function. I would go back up and set X.
Let me stop
would
you
do
there.
the alert.
Let me just stop you there because
Okay, good. So
set
I'm
timeout
all
is not blocking.
Say it again.
The set timeout is not blocking, so it will actually it'll run the console log next.
Oh, I see.
And then it will actually just exit this function, and then it will wait 1 second down here. And once the set timeout works, that's when we get into the alerter function.
So it runs in parallel. Okay, the timeout.
So, what does this have to do with closure? I can't put the two together.
We're getting there.
Oh, okay.
We're getting there, yeah. I'm just starting off with some things that don't seem too unusual, that we've done before, and we're comfortable with them. And then we're gonna get in closure. I like to, start it off slow, and then we'll get there. And then I just out of nowhere trick you, and it's like, ha.
Slams to the next side.
Yeah. So here is the same thing, except, hold on, I like it when it says I'm stuck in a closure. Let's put that there. Oh, I see. That's why I changed it. Never mind, I can't do it. Darn. So here we have our closure alert. The one thing that we did change here is we changed X to 0 because we're going to be changing it when we alert. And the other thing that we changed is instead of calling it inside of here, we're just returning it. And this is really similar from our scope exercises as well, right? So we return alerter, which means that when we call closure alert, we enter into the function body, right? First thing it does is initializes X at 0. It sees that we have, it sees that we have this alerter function, skips over it, and then returns it. And so our func store is storing alerter. And let's just put that in the console so we can look at it. So if we just type out func store here, we see that it's just that function, right? And the same with func store 2. Again, and what it's doing is incrementing X and then returning X. That's what plus plus X means. So you add 1 to X, then you return it. Whereas X plus plus is you return and then you add. So it doesn't show up as well. So if we wanted to then call alerter, how would we go about doing that?
Func store and then vacation.
Yeah. So we just have func store, and we call it just like that. What's it gonna alert?
1.
Yep. And then if we call it again, 2. Why is it 2?
It remembers the scope that it was in.
Mm-hmm. And so this is our closure, which is a fancy word. Just forget the word for now. But for those of you who are wondering, that's the closure, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. So when func store, we call it, it's holding reference to this alerter function. So you can kind of imagine that when we call it, it goes into this function body, it increments X, then returns it as an alert. And so X is then 1. If we call it again, and I see you, I'll call you in a second. Call it again, so this is 1. It's going to go back inside alerter, and it's going to increment again and alert it, and it's going to alert 2.
Is that because we're really kind of storing it? We're not calling closure alert, we're storing it? Storing a reference to it?
Yeah. So you're restoring it in a variable so that we can access it later and call it later. And that function, because of lexical scope, has access to its parent scope still. So in a way, it remembers the environment that it's from.
You are calling the closure alert, but the closure alert is returning a function that's been defined internally.
Mm-hmm.
But you haven't executed that internal function yet.
So the difference would be if we, on the console, just invoke closure alert twice, you just get 1 every time you do closure alert.
You would get,
because if you're not storing it.
Yeah,
you would get
exactly.
a new copy of the alerter function as the return value.
Mm-hmm. So we did func store 2. That's still going to alert 1 because every time we call a function, it creates a brand new scope. And did you have a question, Mark?
They just wanted you to cover pre-increment versus post-increment.
Mm.
And then the other question was, is return alerter the same as calling invoking alerter? And I think you might have covered that.
So as far as the incrementer here, plus plus X what that does is it adds 1 to x and then returns it. Versus x plus plus, it returns x first and then increments it. But that's not important.
By returns, you mean make available to the alert function?
Yes. Yes. So if we changed it, then it would first, if we did this, it would say 0, and it just isn't very good for my example. So. And then the second question is returning alerter the same as invoking it and returning it? And the question is absolutely not. Because if we're invoking it here, then we can't call it down here. What we're doing when we don't invoke it is that we're just returning the function definition itself. So if instead of returning it, if we are here, we can like console log it here, console.log alerter, and this will show us what we're going to return. We'll put this in the console and kind of look at it. So again, we're just console logging alerter, and then it's going to be returned. And so we know whatever this function returns is then going to be stored in this variable. Oh yeah, and then there's our console log. There's our console log there, and then we can also look at func store, and we see that it's the same thing. And since it's a function now, we can call it. If it wasn't a function, we couldn't call it. So for example, if we just returned alerter and called it already, it's going to return whatever this function is returning. So in this case, it's not returning anything, but if we, whoops, but if we wanted to put a return there, just for the example, we can return true. So the change here is inside the alerter function, I'm returning true. And then instead of just returning the function definition, I'm returning and invoking the function. So it's going to invoke the function and return whatever that function invokes. Cool. Whoops. So and then if we look at func store now, it's undefined. Oh, that's weird. Oh, I changed it. So I guess I erased that return. True. So it's undefined because this function is returning undefined. But if we return true, return true, and then did it, and we looked at func store, it now holds the value true, and you can't, true is not a function, true is a value, so you couldn't call true. That doesn't make sense. So that's why we want func store to be a function and not the result of the function, so that we have like this little window into that parent scope that we can access later, and it can be very powerful. And now since func store is a function, we can go ahead and call it, and then we can call it again, and this is our counter. We can count